The ability to show up consistently, simply toiling away at the day-to-day job won't propel you forward. You need to step outside your comfort zone, and you need to communicate and convey to others your perspective.
Welcome to That Pivotal Moment of Change, the podcast that's not about what you do, but how you got to where you are. Let's dive into the twists, the turns, and defining moments that shape our careers. In this episode of That Pivotal Moment of Change, we talk with Paul Strike, a digital experience leader, about his journey from creativity to design leadership. Paul shares insights on learning from failure, embracing self-awareness, and stepping outside your comfort zone. With actionable advice and transformative stories, this episode offers a fresh take on design and leadership.
Hey, Paul, how are you doing?
Hey, Ryan, very well, thank you.
Welcome to the show. It is really good to have you here, and I am excited for this conversation with you.
Likewise, very excited. Thank you for having me on.
So I'm going to start off. Do you want to talk a little bit about your background and how you got into design?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've always been a creative at heart, and this goes back to my high school years where I was very active in a lot of high school plays where I was not just, performing as it relates to a role, but I was also involved in a lot of the set design behind the scenes, and that creativity behind visioning a beautiful stage that would communicate some type of fantasy environment or mountainscape with all forms of, colors and paintbrushes and textures and treatments was just fantastic because I got to take a step back and look at what this artistic approach yielded. And it was, something that inspired me to do more. How can I do more of this, but for organizations and obviously get paid for it. So leaving high school, I studied visual arts and communication at the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology. The natural progression of things led me to graphic design. Graphic design morphed into multimedia design, and multimedia design became more web and internet focused. And as you can appreciate, around the early 2000s, the boom of .com just swept across the world. And so I got heavily involved with companies who are really struggling with this concept of being digital. How do we become more digital? How do we reach people through the web? And I started to immerse myself in conversations, in trainings that revolved around strategy, software development, ecosystems, operations, people and culture. And it just blew up. And it was fantastic because everywhere I went in my early days, earlier on in my career, everyone was wrestling with the same issue. Like, how do we embrace and invest in this digital trend that is sweeping across, the world?
I really like how it started off doing something even creative earlier on and how that changed in design. One thing that you said, and I could really relate to, was getting into multimedia, because I took a fairly similar path and just kind of curious at the time, as multimedia was relatively new and nobody really understood where it could go. What was it that made you latch on to multimedia at the time?
Look, I think hands down, it was the interactivity that came out of playing around with applications, menu systems, navigation schemas. The interactivity that bridged the gap between technology and human, I thought was fantastic. And the way interfaces respond with such creative flair back then, with such pronounced animation, was so new and so innovative that I just wanted to learn more and more and more. And I always loved that relationship between human and technology. When you perform a task and the technology responds to that task with either feedback, another option, an animated starburst that congratulates you on a task completed, that filled me with a lot of inspiration. And it was great to see one's creative efforts come to life through that medium.
And at the time when you were first getting into that, did you see that as something that you could potentially make a career out of?
Not initially, because I didn't believe something so creative, so playful. I didn't believe there could be a job for something like that. But through my network, through friends and colleagues, I started hearing of agencies building dynamic menu systems for DVDs, dynamic interfaces for a lot of this international media that flooded Australia back in the early 2000s. And so I started to knock on doors and I started to talk to agencies about, do you need, a creative, interactive visual designer to imagine something very new, something very unique? And they were like, absolutely. And that was, like Christmas. It was so exciting.
What are you up to today?
Shortly after that stint of creativity, and mind you, the creativity has really never stopped. Um, I ended up working for one of Australia's, if not Australia's largest telecommunications institutions, organisations called Telstra. And I did a people, culture, and leadership course through that organisation, which was a combination of the Myers-Briggs and Bellman study that basically broke down the psychology of an individual that looked at focusing on many different qualities around, social intelligence, creative intelligence, academic intelligence, entrepreneurial, essentially. And anyway, long story short, I came out of that study being labelled a plant. And when I tell people this story, people say, well, what does that mean? Well, a plant grows roots, and those roots connect to the earth. And the theme of being a plant is that of being a connector. So today, I'm connecting with as many like-minded leaders in the industry across banking, financial services, healthcare, pharma, life sciences, and consumer technology to further understand, okay, we've gone through this phase of digital transformation and many still don't quite understand it. Now you layer that with the emerging technology we're seeing today around AI and people's heads are exploding. So how do we navigate it? How do we design around it? How do we design for it? And how do we, more intimately understand our customers who are also trying to navigate it and understand it at the same time? And so that's, been a fantastic journey because I'm meeting some amazing people who are, in the same boat as I am.
What are some of the more interesting things you've learned so far talking to these leaders?
There's still a lack of understanding and an abundance of confusion as it relates to, UX design. There is still questions around, well, how do we invest in the right people that are going to drive change at scale, but change that's not only at scale, change that is consistent. And so some of the themes that I'm hearing are very much operational, very much people and culture orientated. As everybody knows, many organizations around the world hired too quick, too fast post-pandemic, believing that could be sustainable. And we've seen over the last 18 months, that has not been the case. And that has largely been a people challenge, a people and culture challenge. So what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing is, how do we correct this situation that we're in? How do we adjust and refocus on a greater depth and breadth of expertise across the full spectrum of human-centered design that is technology orientated, it is people orientated, it's also society and environment orientated. And this is a very interesting challenge to address because, it's inherently people orientated. And, to be quite frank, organizations and leaders are wrestling with this at the moment. It is a big challenge.
Yeah, 100% agree. And it's fascinating. I think this is something we could probably spend an entire episode on. I'm going to stay focused on you for right now. So I'm going to move on to, how did you get into leadership?
Leadership became abundantly obvious in a very scary way when I went from an IC, an individual contributor, to someone who was not just responsible for making screens look good and creating that artistic flair, but someone who was now responsible for people, someone who was responsible for creating the environments by which people flourish, they thrive, they grow. How do you become someone who empowers and enables at the same time? And that, again, was relatively early in my career, where I was appointed a manager of design that all of a sudden inherited, 15, 20 designers. And so straight away, your responsibilities just explode. And now you're thinking about things multidimensionally. You're thinking not just about the technology, not just about the screens and the visual aspect to, communicating those solutions. You're now talking about empathy. You're now talking about situational awareness. You're now thinking about, how do I solve problems in context to this individual's need that not only addresses that need, but also looks at what the business is trying to achieve around that need. And so the complexity magnified almost overnight. And that was a pivotal moment when I needed to take a step back and immerse myself in more training, more personal and professional development, but more self-awareness so that I could learn from others. So one thing I didn't want to do, I didn't want to be the one standing on the hill waving the flag and everybody just follow my lead. I wanted a co-creative approach to leadership where not only was I leading, but I was also learning at the same time. And that was very important to me.
That's really powerful, actually, leading and learning. What piece of advice would you have for somebody who's just getting into leadership, or even say an experienced leader, to help them figure things out?
Yeah, oh look, there's many. Starting with an experienced leader, I think something I've learned is, prioritizing speed over accuracy does not improve your decision making. Okay, everybody pushes and pushes. Hurry up, let's get it done. We've got these features and functions to get to the engineering team. That needs to be developed by a certain date and then launched by, this certain time frame. Speed does not improve decision making. Also, a great quote by Simon Sinek is, leadership is not a license to do less. Just because you're in this seat of authority, it doesn't mean you sit back and let others do the work. It's actually a responsibility to do more. And that's why I've always taken a co-creative approach to leadership. Not everyone's going to like you. You have to make tough decisions, hard choices, and you can't please everyone. Get over it and get on with it. You have to embrace an ability that revolves around adaptability to work at different altitudes. And this is a challenge for leaders today, and that is the 60,000 foot altitude as it relates to business strategy, having that commercial mindset, that commercial acumen to understand profit, loss, balance sheets, cost models, revenue structures, call center challenges, risk management, legal, right? No designer wants to immerse themselves in that. But if we're working for an organization, like a bank, you have to do that. You have to, be aware of these sorts of things. But then at the same time, you still need to have your finger on the pulse as it relates to parachuting down to the surface level and being very tactile as it relates to the application and execution of the work itself. This is a great way to demonstrate your commitment, not only to the program, but to your peers, that you're still willing to roll up your sleeves and get on with it. That's very important. And I would encourage everybody to think like that. It's very difficult to apply. That's another reality.
There's a lot of just really great nuggets of wisdom there. I'm sitting there nodding my head. Really good stuff. Looking back at some more reflective type of things, what are some key lessons you've learned throughout your career?
I think if I was to wind the clock back 20 years, I would have changed my academic path, not to steer myself away from design, but to get a deeper understanding of the psychology around things like behavioral economics, cognitive science. I would have taken a career path that looks more deeply at the psychology around behaviors and people. We work in an industry where we have to understand people, right? It is the bread and butter of what we do. and it is both internally focused and it is externally focused. I certainly would have changed my academic trajectory, knowing what I know now back then.
And what are some of the bigger challenges you faced in your career, and how did you overcome these challenges?
I've always been a huge sponsor around the notion of failure. I believe failure presents some of the best learning opportunities for any individual, whether you're starting out or whether you're a mature leader. We're always wiser in hindsight. As a designer coming from a very fast-paced, consulting agency background, coming into the corporate world, you are hit with a set of behaviors that really defy and challenge what you've learned, what you've been exposed to. These behaviors and challenges, present themselves as very childish, and they're obviously very political. I think one of the things that I learned very, very early in my career when I got my first corporate job was not reading the political play. I'm not a politician. I'm not great at this. I like to get on with the job at hand. Okay. I like to solve problems and create the best solution and opportunities for the people around me and the business I'm trying to, move forward. But I thought that delivering those results, would overshadow everything else. And many people say, let the work speak for yourself. Let the work do the justification. That's not always the case. I got blindsided many times by political attacks from peers that I didn't see coming. And it cost me dearly as it relates to my credibility. Now, one would argue, well, that's completely unfair. That's unwarranted. That's politics. And it is the DNA inside every large corporation around the world. You have to be a little bit more astute. You have to be a little bit more aware of that. It's sad that we have to operate in this way. It's disappointing that cultures behave this way. It's been like this for 100 years, and it's not going away anytime soon. So awareness, I guess, is my message. To be aware of those around you, be aware of the political play, and just, don't be paranoid about it, but don't ignore it.
I think one of the things that you hit on there is just about culture and how cultures may need to shift or change at a lot of organizations. If you had one quick piece of advice for somebody who's thinking to themselves, okay, here's something I want to implement or do differently, or something I need to change, but this can be a cultural shift, how would you advise somebody on being part of changing a culture?
One of my uncomfortable truths as being a design leader is knowing when to influence behavioral change versus when to leave it alone. There comes a time when you're working for cultures when you need to identify when to swim with the current versus against. So knowing when that time is to influence change, pick your moments and be very purposeful and intentional about choosing that moment. Communicate very openly and very strategically. You need to possess the ability to negotiate with reason. You need to bring a level of adaptability, integrity, and authenticity to those conversations where you can effectively tell a story that solves a problem and at the same time addresses a critical business need. And you have to use the language around that story, within that story, that people can identify and they can resonate with. Anything outside of that, it's an uphill battle. Not impossible, but it's an uphill battle. That would be my piece of advice for someone really looking to influence change, especially when it comes to culture.
Can you share an instance where a setback or failure turned out to be a hidden opportunity?
Coming back to my point around language, coming back to the themes of culture, I remember I was presenting the findings of a usability testing exercise we did on a certain platform, which was a B2B platform at the time, where we presented an opportunity to redesign the existing experience into something far more interactive, far more immersive. The objective was to gain sponsorship and investment to actually move forward with the recommendation, so that we could, continue the program at large and we could deliver something absolutely state of the art for the business. This failed. Now, it failed not because of the design solution. There was nothing wrong with the design solution. It failed because of the presentation. It failed because of the lack of storytelling. It failed because of the lack of identifiable language that was familiar to the audience. They just weren't resonating with all of the UI and UX terms. They weren't resonating and identifying with the design speak the team was presenting around. What we learned from that exercise, many, many years ago, was not reading the room, not understanding the audience we were trying to help. And so what that did was completely change and shift our perspective as it relates to how we show up and how we look at intimately first, not solving that problem, but understanding and framing that problem as it relates to who these people in the room were. What mattered most to them? What were their priorities? What were keeping them up at night? And once we understood that, we completely changed our approach. We kept the solution the same, plus or minus some small little tweaks, but we changed the entire vernacular around how we presented that story. A great failure, but an even bigger learning opportunity.
And can you recall a moment in your career that significantly influenced your path?
When was it? It was the end of 2013, 2014. I'd been working for big corporate for a while, and I needed a break. A colleague of mine at the time said, why don't we start up our own business? We had received many comments around our design leadership expertise that was not only execution focused, but it was very strategic. What if you applied your experience and expertise to a different audience, to a different industry? And this was an absolute game changer. So in 2014, I started my own human-centered design consultancy and ran it as Chief Design Officer, startup founder. Now, when you're embarking on such a journey, what becomes immediately apparent is the accountability that then falls on your shoulders. The accountability to yourself, to your family, but also to individuals who, in some case, were building businesses from scratch, mortgaging their homes to do so, and relied on you to make their business and their product a success. That was absolutely huge. And it was arguably the best advancement and career uplifting moment I've had, in my entire 20 years of doing this. It also showed me how to be more business-centric, more commercial as it relates to how I approach design. And it also gave me the ability to hone my communication skills, because I was working with, CEOs, board members, CMOs, CTOs, right down to interns within large-scale 150, 200-year-old organizations who knew what they had to do, but had no idea how. And that's why I was contracted in to bridge that gap. We had a lot of success, because we made it a very deep interpersonal relationship, right? Where it revolved around the principles of co-creation. It revolved around the principles of design thinking as it relates to how you think about the problem at hand and how you craft a solution then that is more contextually accurate than the one that they currently have. Now, these are the things that forced you to adapt. It forced you to evolve. And then, coming back into the corporate world, wow, the learnings I was able to then bestow onto others was just so rewarding.
Myself looking back at significant moments and, things that have really influenced my path, I also stepped aside and started a business even outside of design. For me, the business didn't end up working out, but I realized after the fact, as I learned so much doing it, that I became much better at what I'm doing now because of that time.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. Well said. The growth I was able to achieve, and it was only in a 4.5 year period of time, really when I was only planning on doing it for about 2, was, just amazing. I learned more in those 4 years than I did my entire career. There's just so much more at stake that requires you to be so much more multidisciplined. in your approach to business as well as design.
What skills or mindsets have been crucial in navigating your career's twists and turns?
I think, as I was mentioning before, communication, I think, is just so overlooked, but so incredibly important. It can make or break relationships. Your ability to understand yourself, so self-awareness and humility, go a long, long way. I see a lot of leaders in many senior roles not bringing that self-awareness and humility to the table, believing that, well, I'm in a leadership position, therefore I know everything and I can't be told otherwise. That's a surefire way to shoot yourself in the foot. I think, knowing oneself gives you a greater ability to empathize with others so that you can understand more deeply what challenges really matter most to an individual you're trying to help. I would also say, there are some competencies out there that revolve around having the ability to be very analytical and then translate a lot of those analytics into, visualized stories. I think is a very important, skill set to communicate with clarity and intent. Always show up with a purpose. Okay, always be confident and transparent around what you're trying to do and who you're trying to help. I think finally, and there are many others, but in interest of time, I think collaboration, again, is something that, is given a lot of lip service, but people really don't understand what goes into collaboration. What do we mean by leveraging a collective genius that can accelerate a solution that is beneficial to the customers as well as it is for the business? Being able to lead those conversations, being able to workshop and facilitate discussions that need to be critiqued, need to be debated, that's not easy. It takes time. And it takes a lot of confidence to be able to show up with that clarity, with that purpose, to bring all these people together and work towards a common goal.
What do you think the future of design looks like?
Ooh, the future of design, such a topical question, and it's still being debated. Look, everybody right now is talking about the obvious that revolves around, AI, machine learning. We've got augmented and virtual reality. We've got generative design. The future of design as it relates to customer-facing experiences are going to fall into three categories, I believe. Technological advancements, societal shifts, and environmental considerations. Right now, we're in this phase of experimentation. Everybody's looking at all of these new tools, all this amazing technology to automate, to improve efficiencies, to improve productivity. And it's fantastic because everyone's finding out what works and what doesn't work. What's going to be very interesting over the next 12 to 18 months is when things really start to stick. And in fact, Google are starting, as well as Microsoft and Apple are starting to do this now. But when you start to see commercial experience strategies attributed to a lot of this emerging technology that really does impact those three categories I just mentioned, that's going to be fascinating, absolutely fascinating. When we see all of this sort of really start to influence our behavior and change the way we interact amongst ourselves, that's going to be a pivotal moment. But it has to be designed in context, to those changes, to that type of behavior and to that specific need. It cannot be just technology for the sake of technology. Otherwise, again, it defaults to just a tool. The second thing, which I think is the more interesting thing, is I think design is going to have a great impact as it relates to the employee workplace experience. Now, a survey done in 2020, only 29% of executives are invested in the workplace cultural reimagination, so to speak, where the redesigning of the environment around employees is up there in parallel with designing your experiences for customers. I have heard over my career Paul, we need to design more consistent experiences. There needs to be greater brand advocacy. There needs to be greater brand loyalty. And my response to that has always been, if we want a more consistent customer experience, we need to design a more consistent employee experience. How we show up, how we work, how we collaborate, co-create, as well as how we deliver, will enable that consistency at scale. And I think we're going to see somewhat of a shift to more cross-functional autonomous teams. We're going to see a shift to a more human-centric, interactive operating model that hopefully will leverage a lot of these emerging technologies out there as well.
What are the most important takeaways from your career journey that you think everyone should know about?
The ability to show up consistently. Simply toiling away at the day-to-day job won't propel you forward. You need to step outside your comfort zone, and you need to communicate and convey to others your perspective, your approach, your expertise, so that you can create meaningful dialogues where everybody's input is heard and valued. So my second point, Ryan, is persistence in the face of adversity. There will always be setbacks in your role, in your career. There may be times when you make a mistake, where you don't get that invite to that meeting, where you miss out on that promotion, or the role you've been eyeing off for months goes to somebody else. It's precisely during these moments that crucial learning takes place. The kind of learning that fuels your growth. It's your ability to overcome these obstacles and triumph from them, not fall back and be resentful. Or be critical. They'll teach you to rise again. They'll teach you with renewed vigor a sense of determination. Again, learn from them. Be so good you can't be ignored. Taking control of your career is absolutely essential. Don't just do what the job description says. Don't just do what your manager says you to do. Go above and beyond. Also, don't sit back and rely on others. Propel yourself forward in a way that is, proactive. Demonstrate value by, engaging with others, leveraging that honest feedback, and then creating solutions around challenges you've identified. They may be, cultural with your immediate team. They may be external, relating to a new customer problem. Step outside your comfort zone, and always try and do more. And then, during these opportunities, keep a realistic perspective and always give back. Don't just take with the expectation of receiving. Lend a helping hand. Donate your time. In all, my years of receiving advice and support, I've always found that if you reciprocate the generosity that someone gives to yourself in a way that assists others in their journey, you will be recognized, and it will become a pivotal moment for you in your role, where people see you as someone who is very genuine and just loves to help others. So there's some takeaways from my career.
And there's a lot of really good takeaways there, and I think we could probably riff for a long time on some interesting things. I do have one question for you, and you mentioned this more than once. I think it's incredibly important, and that's stepping outside of your comfort zone. And stepping outside of your comfort zone, I think, is the best way to learn. It's the best way to fail. It's also the best way to help get ahead with stepping out of their comfort zone.
You'll never know until you dive in. Don't wait for there to be a perfect moment or opportunity. Odds are there never will be. Take the plunge, take the leap, and have faith. It's also very important to be realistic about stepping outside of your comfort zone as it relates to having the ability to control things within your control. If you're stepping outside of your comfort zone to learn things that aren't of value, right, to yourself, to your team, or to the business, I'd think twice about it. But identify those areas of learning opportunity, identify those areas of growth, identify those areas of, I don't like to use the word weakness, but identify those areas of opportunity where you think, I could be better at this, or I'm not learning enough in the seat I'm in or based on the people around me, go for it. Again, take that leap.
What advice would you give to someone earlier on in their career who is still trying to figure things out?
For someone coming into this space of design, be curious. Know how to communicate your self-worth. Keep a day diary and document your impact, so that you are turning the so-called invisible labor into undeniable metrics and results, so that you can show up and be proud of what you've achieved, and you can voice it to others in a way that visualizes your ability to move the needle. Don't be scared of failure. Like I said, as my career path, as my experience has shown me, failure represents the best learning opportunities. Do a little bit of research every day on something that matters most to the priorities you're working on. Meet, network, contact, insert yourself into circles where you get to learn from other peers, other mentors, other leaders from across other different disciplines. One of the things that I valued early on in my career was really to understand the world of engineering and technology, not just the world of design. I wanted to understand the mechanics behind how stuff is built, and what goes into the intricacies of, the code, looking at all forms of, Java, HTML, CSS, looking at platforms and systems like Visual Basic, Python, Ruby on Rails. I wanted to understand those worlds because those worlds needed to partner with my worlds. So be curious at the end of the day, ask lots of questions and never stop. But also in this changing space, if you're going or if you are pursuing a career in, let's say, UX design, as the industry calls it, make sure you show up knowing the difference between design and UX. They are different things. One is very outcome orientated. The other is very problem framing orientated. Think about how you show up and the language you use communicating to others.
Closing out here, what is your favorite quote?
I have two. The first is an African proverb. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I've always been a sponsor of that quote because of how it promotes togetherness. The second is what a former mentor of mine, I'm not too sure where he got it from, a former mentor of mine said to me, the day you plant the seed is not the day you earn the fruit. And that relates to all aspects of our journey through career, but it also relates to all aspects of transformation and disruption. There's this massive monumental journey that we're all trying to understand and put our arms around. I've always believed that bears a lot of weight because what we do in this game, it takes time. And I know we get pressure from leaders and managers, hurry up, get it done, speed's important, time to market. It's not that that's not true, but that's the tip of the iceberg. Okay, there is a bigger picture that is more transformative, that takes time. The golden egg, the golden nugget around that notion, that theme of transformation is culture.
There's a lot of really good content out there today. Is there anything that you would recommend others to look at?
You're right. There is a ton of stuff out there. And it's sometimes a little bit overwhelming to navigate what piece of content, what piece of information is going to be relevant to me. I like bite-sized pieces of information that are digestible, that I can use as like a playbook or toolkit. One of my favorites is a book by Josh Seiden, small little book. It's only about 80 pages. Outcomes over output. It looks at customer metrics. It looks at the definition of done. It looks at, as we are now moving, into this realm of connected digital ecosystems that form relationships in our lives. It looks at setting goals around specific outcomes that, that are practical, that you can use every day. And the great thing about this book is it doesn't just relate to designers. It relates to engineers. product managers, project managers, marketers, brand specialists, because what's inside this book are principles for the next century, or the future way of working. And it's just a great little reference.
And lastly, Paul, where can people find you?
I'm actively available on LinkedIn, so please reach out, send me a message. I'd love to hear from, I guess, anyone across the digital industry who's not only wrestling with challenges, but, have a story to tell and just, would like a conversation. I'm always willing to make that connection. So please reach out.
Paul, thank you so much for being on the show today. I think there was so much good content and nuggets of wisdom there, and I really appreciate you taking the time to be here.
My pleasure, Ryan. Thank you so much for having me on. It's been great.
Hey, thanks for listening. If you enjoyed our content today, please like, subscribe, and comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time.